All right, so.
Welcome everybody to the latest in our Library Spirituality series. Thank you all for coming. Today we're happy to welcome Father Jim Schroeder, priest of the Sacred Heart, who's a clinical psychologist. He spent 10 years working here in Milwaukee and then 25 years in St. Louis at the St. Louis Consultation Center, working primarily with clergy and religious. So he's going to be giving us a talk today on an image of God's spirituality. So let's welcome Father Jim.
Thank you. I originally offered to do something on the SCJ spirituality. I became an SCJ in 1963, and I studied at Sacred Heart School when it was just for SCJs and was ordained in 1970. So it's not an image of God spirituality, it's an image of God spirituality. In Hebrew, it's Selem Elohim, or in Latin, Imago Dei. This is a concept in Judaism, Christianity, and Sufism, that is Islam, that human beings are created in the image and likeness of God. I was asked to do something coming out of my background as psychology, and that's why I chose this. In Genesis we read, "So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them." Jesus prayed to God as his Father. He'd say, "Abba, Father." He also referred to himself as the Son of God. God so loved the world, he gave his only Son. And he promised the Spirit. "When the Advocate comes, whom I will send you from the Father, he will testify in my behalf." Jesus seems to reveal that God is a trinity of persons who relate to each other in what theologians sometimes call an eternal dance of love, perichoresis in Greek. This is the image in which we are made, the pattern of life we are all to live. Through creation and evolution, we're created at the most fundamental level as pack animals, at the supreme level as persons relating in a Trinitarian way. In object relations theory and psychology, our fundamental goal is satisfying relationships. The psychologist Murray Bowen wrote that we have two opposing forces, life forces: a built-in urge for individuality opposed by a drive for togetherness and emotional closeness. We are hardwired to relate, to be in relationship. And when we're not, we become ill. We're out of sync with ourselves, with others, with nature, and with God. In March of 2017, the Boston Globe quoted the Surgeon General of the United States as saying, "The most prevalent health issue is not cancer or heart disease or obesity, it's isolation." Often priests and religious do many holy things, like saying prayers or presiding at Eucharist or sacraments, yet they have no true prayer, no true spirituality, no real friendship with God or with Jesus. Why? Because they're not in relationship with the self or with nature, and especially they're not in relationship with their neighbor. Our ability to relate is whole cloth, it's hand in glove. We cannot relate to God without a base of relationships with humans. In their book, Spiritual Wholeness for Clergy, Don Hans and Wayne Fair wrote, "The experience of intimacy is the core of health and salvation." The famous black theologian Howard Thurman wrote, "Sincerity in human relations is equal to and the same as sincerity with God." If we accept the explanation as a clue to Jesus' meaning, we come upon the stark fact that the insistence of Jesus upon genuineness is absolute. Man's relation to man and man's relation to God are one relation. We need to know and appreciate ourselves. Then we need to be vulnerable and open with friends. That is, relationships that are outside our roles, relationships of equal power and openness. Only when we develop such intimacy can we fully know and appreciate ourselves. Then we can relate to God in an open, intimate, shame-free way. We can trust God and live in intimacy with God. Sometimes our pattern of attachment to another is so vandalized it makes intimately relating almost impossible. It's then that we need remedial work. And so we seek a relationship with a psychologist and group experience. As we become more adept at relating in a mutual, intimate way without using boundaries that are too rigid or too loose, we can begin to experience intimacy with God in and through relationships with other people and with God alone. Some religious and clergy tend to blame celibacy, but our priests of the Sacred Heart constitutions tell us that by celibacy and just by following Jesus for everyone, we bind ourselves to follow Christ in his love of God and his brothers, and in his way of being present to people. Jesus gives us all the way to live in love. I'm going to give you a handout here, and if you'll look at the circles of intimacy on this, you'll see Jesus in the center, and in the Spirit, he is with his Father, his God. The next circle, his closest friend seems to be John. And then his special friends are Peter, James, and John, Mary Magdalene, and Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. He had family in Mary and Joseph and his brothers. He has colleagues in the apostles and then the disciples and the women, including the widows. And then the masses of people and the marginalized. I urge you to copy out these circles and do your own circles of intimacy. This sets before us the task to enter into experiences of relating, of developing friendship, of trial and error. This is being true to what we're created to be, being true to the call of Christ to be one in him as he's one with the Father and the Father with him, to be one in their spirit. Only then can we live and contribute to the reign of God, the dance of love of the Trinity. Only then will the words of our prayers have a soul, a genuineness, and our Eucharist will be communion with Jesus in his love and in his offering of self to the Father for people. Only then will we live in friendship with God. I want to close with something I picked up on my trip to India. It's a greeting using another language, Hindi, and it's Namaste. It means the God in me greets the God in you. For each one of us is a temple of the Holy Spirit.
Do we have anybody have any questions or comments?
Oh.
thing, Father, when you were talking a little bit about, as a seminarian, I think we've had a lot of classes, especially about celibacy. I would have to say that I think there was a good example of, you were talking about that some priests and others blame celibacy, but they're not really loving others. I mean,
Right.
we've gone through a lot of classes, at least at St. Francis. I don't know how Sacred Heart does, or even other communities, but I think sometimes that seems to be a question I've noticed. You know, we ask, are you loving God? You can pray, you see them are praying people, but they don't really love other people. It's how do they react to their celibacy? I mean,
Yeah.
what's a good thing?
Well, that's horrible celibacy. I
Right.
mean, it's celibacy in the worst sort of way.
Right.
I mean, celibate merely means unmarried. Hugh Hefner was celibate so that he could play around most of his life. Katharine Hepburn was celibate. After her first marriage, she never remarried
Right.
because of her work, her film, okay? So if we do not become celibates to love, we should not be celibates.
And that's what I put down, because that's the one thing they told us, that celibacy is about the ultimate love, the ultimate sacrifice.
Right,
And when they're not doing that, they're blaming that, they're obviously having some other issues.
exactly. They are. And it comes out in other ways. As Paul said, it's better to marry than burn.
Yeah.
And so many people who have entered into celibacy are so miserable and are doing it so awfully that they should leave, in my opinion, because it's not a good match. And it's not just loving God. I can't just love God if I'm not loving others. That's the basic point of this. You know, you can't build a third floor over an empty lot, as my mentor used to say.
That's a great image.
Now, again, I'm sorry, just one last thing I want to add real quick. I noticed this circle, and I'm trying to think in my own mind, in my circle. And of course, obviously, I'd like to think there's Jesus and God, you know, and I was at Institute of Priestly Formation last summer, which was an amazing process. One of the things I prayed about was to really develop that relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And Ignatian style of prayer helped me discern into that process. And I think that's a very important aspect. But I sometimes struggle, and I understand what's happening is, where's my prayer life going in there? And that's, I think, that whole important part. But if you don't have a good solid foundation, these circles really just kind of collapse in each other. And then I'm thinking of like how my family and friends fall in there, and sometimes they get moved and bounced up and down, especially at moments like I'm having with some of my brothers right now. That circle, you know, I still want to keep them in it, but they maybe are being filtered out. But I think if I'm not having a good center, then there's a reason why I have to look at what's going there. And they're hurting too, which hurts them. So
Yep.
how would you recommend that kind of like balance? I mean, is it just prayer, talking? What's the general thing that you find works best?
Well, you know, you brought up the Ignatian exercises, the
Yes.
Ignatian form of prayer, and I think it's a magnificent way to help anyone get to know Jesus more fully. It's a way of contemplating the Gospels, essentially, which are our primary books to get to know Jesus. And I think we need to read about Jesus, read biographies, and get to know him as a friend. However, I've heard so many parish priests, even religious who work in parishes, say, well, I don't have time to say my prayers. And the problem is they do a dualistic approach to ministry and prayer. A book I used for my priestly ordination retreat was A Man of God for Others. And this cardinal wrote that a priest becomes holy by doing holy things with and for others. For example, right now, I could call this a God moment.
Right.
For I connect to you and you connect to me. And God was within us, and God is between us, and we're within God. And if I begin to relate to my many circles of intimacy in that fashion, my day becomes a prayer. So I don't need to rattle words like a pagan at any particular time, because I am uniting to God intimately in very many moments of my life. And that's part of what is so essential in terms of renewing one's intention at the beginning of each action. Just to take a second or two to say, okay, what am I about here? Why am I with you, or you, or you? Why am I with you? And who are we? And what do we live within? We live within God. And if I begin to practice that, it used to be called practicing the presence of God, or as Ignatius would call it, finding God in all things and in all people, even some of the most distasteful people, then I am living a life of intimacy. Does that help?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Thank you, Father, for this talk. I want to just focus on the horizontal love relationship. It means a relation between that the person has with other in the society before having the relation with God. As a priest, it's a great one of the problems, difficulty that we face in the parish, having relation with others. Relation means, I want to say, the priests, normally as human beings, you need to be related with somebody, with your brother, your confrere, and also with some Christians. This brings problem because others will feel uncomfortable and they will be jealous that, okay, you are related only to this family, not to us. And now you can become like a priest of some families. It creates sometimes misunderstanding in the parish. Or sometimes break down your pastoral work. How
Absolutely.
can we solve this case?
Yeah, and that's a terrible danger when priests or religious or any church minister tries to make those they serve their friends, or tries to zone in on a particular person or family. It creates jealousy. Just like parents should not choose one child over the other and always be spending time with this son or this daughter. The others will hate the child and hate the parent, and rightly so, for showing favoritism. Our job, if we're going to work in parish, is to not make our parishioners our friends. They're not in that friendship circle of intimacy, okay? They're colleagues, they're disciples, they are the people of God. But my friendship should be with fellow ministers. My friendship would be lay friends that I've known even before I was ordained. My friendship might be other ministers or people who aren't Catholic, for example. A priest in a small town has a difficult time finding where can he make friends. And he can with physicians, attorneys, merchants who aren't parishioners. It's fine to make friendships with them. You can go golfing, you can share your problems, you can tell each other your secrets. But to use your parishioners as your friends, or to attempt to, is an impossibility, and it's wrong. It's wrong psychologically, and in my opinion, it's wrong morally. Because it can never be a power relationship that is equal. Okay? As a pastor, I always have a kind of ecclesial and even more power over a parishioner. I can accept or refuse to do a baptism or a wedding for whatever reason. They can. We don't have equal power. And so, by definition, we cannot be friends, which is a relationship of equal power and equal mutuality. Does that help? Good. Yeah.
So on these circles of support,
Yeah.
for a priest, parish isn't on here. It's a further out circle, and it's not a circle of support.
No, it's
Right?
well, it is a circle of intimacy because, as a psychologist, for example, I had very, very intimate relationships with people. People would tell me things they never told anyone in their whole world.
Okay.
But I didn't tell them my secrets. It's unequal. It's intimate, but not equal. It's not friendship. And so if you did a circle of intimacy of parishioners, it would be on one of the outer circles.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
It would be beyond family. It would be on disciples or colleagues. Okay?
So even here, I mean, with Jesus and disciples and so forth, there's not perfect equality, right?
No.
So that doesn't